I never thought I'd be that woman. You know, the one you see on daytime TV, clutching tissues while telling her story to a judge. But there I was, standing in a Philadelphia courtroom on a cold February morning, my hands shaking as I held a stack of text messages that would change everything. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 6 months ago, I was married to Derek Mitchell, a successful real estate developer in the Philadelphia suburbs. We had 2 beautiful children, Emma, who just turned 8, and little Jake, who's 5. From the outside, we looked perfect. Derek drove a Mercedes, we lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Radnor, and our Christmas cards always featured us smiling in matching sweaters. But behind closed doors, Derek was someone else entirely. Started small. A raised voice here, a slammed door there. Then came the criticism. I was too fat, too thin, too stupid, too emotional. I cooked wrong, I cleaned wrong, I parented wrong. Every single thing I did was scrutinized, picked apart, and thrown back in my face like ammunition. The kids would hide in Emma's room when his voice started to rise, and I'd hear her whispering to Jake that everything would be okay, even though she was just a child herself. The night I finally left was the night he pushed me into the kitchen counter so hard that I cracked a rib. Emma saw it happen. She was standing in the doorway in her pink pajamas, her eyes wide with terror, and something inside me just snapped. Not with anger, but with clarity. I couldn't let my daughter grow up thinking this was normal. I couldn't let Jake learn that this was how men treat women. I took the kids to my sister Rachel's apartment in Center City that night. She lived in a tiny 1-bedroom near Rittenhouse Square, and the 3 of us slept on her pull-out couch for 2 weeks while I figured out what to do. Rachel worked as a paralegal at a family law firm, and she connected me with one of the attorneys there, a sharp woman named Margaret Chin who had kind eyes but a steel backbone. Margaret helped me file for divorce and, more importantly, helped me get a protection from abuse order. The PFA, as she called it, legally required Derek to stay at least 100 yards away from me at all times. No contact, no showing up at my workplace, no surprise visits, nothing. The judge granted it immediately after seeing the photos of my bruised ribs and reading Emma's statement about what she'd witnessed. Derek sat in that courtroom with his expensive lawyer, looking at me like I'd betrayed him, like I was the villain in this story. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. We were granted temporary custody arrangements. The kids would stay with me during the week, and Derek would have supervised visits every Saturday at a family center in Wayne. A neutral observer would be present to make sure everything stayed appropriate. Derek hated it. He told his lawyer it was humiliating, that I was turning his own children against him. But here's the thing about men like Derek. They can't stand losing control. For the first month, he followed the rules. The visits happened on schedule, the supervisor's reports were clean, and I started to breathe a little easier. I found us a small apartment in Narberth, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Emma decorated her room with fairy lights, and Jake lined up his toy cars on the windowsill. We ate cereal for dinner sometimes and watched movies on Friday nights, and slowly, I watched my kids start to laugh again. Then the text messages started. First, they came to my phone. Simple things. Where are the kids' soccer cleats? Does Jake still take his allergy medicine? Normal co-parenting questions that seemed innocent enough. But Margaret had warned me. Any contact violated the PFA. Any contact at all. I documented every message but didn't respond. Then Derek got smarter. The messages stopped coming to me and started coming through the kids. Emma came home from a Saturday visit with a note folded in her backpack. She handed it to me nervously, her little fingers trembling. The note was in Derek's handwriting. Tell your mother she needs to drop off Jake's birth certificate at my office. I need it for insurance. Important. My stomach dropped. He was using our 8-year-old daughter as a messenger, deliberately violating the protection order but doing it in a way he thought was untraceable. Emma looked up at me with worried eyes and asked if she'd done something wrong. I hugged her tight and told her she hadn't. But inside I was furious and terrified, because if Derek was willing to manipulate our children like this, what else was he capable of? The notes became a weekly occurrence. Every Saturday, Emma or Jake would come home with something tucked into their backpacks, their pockets, sometimes even folded into their lunch boxes. Derek was relentless. Tell your mother the lawyer needs her signature on the bank documents. Tell your mother I need the tax returns from 2022. Tell your mother to stop being difficult and just talk to me like an adult. That last one made my blood boil. He was calling me difficult while using our children as his personal mail carriers, violating a court order designed to keep me safe. But what made it worse was watching what it did to Emma. She started having nightmares. She'd wake up crying at 2 in the morning, afraid she'd forgotten to give me one of Daddy's messages. She became anxious, withdrawn. Her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called me one afternoon to say Emma had burst into tears during reading time for no apparent reason. When I picked her up from school that day, she was sitting in the office with red-rimmed eyes, clutching her backpack like it contained evidence of a crime. Because in a way, it did. I took photos of every note, every message. I forwarded the texts that Derek started sending through Emma's iPad, messages he thought were clever because technically he wasn't contacting me directly. He'd write things like, Emma, ask Mom if she can be reasonable for once, or Jake, tell Mommy that Daddy misses you both and this doesn't have to be so hard. Margaret told me we had a strong case for contempt of court, but we needed to wait for the main custody hearing. It was scheduled for late March, just 2 weeks away. She assured me that once the judge saw the pattern of manipulation and violation, Derek's custody would be severely restricted. But Derek wasn't finished. Not even close. The worst incident happened on a Sunday afternoon. Jake came home from his weekend visit with Derek's mother, who Derek had convinced to supervise since he claimed the family center was too restrictive. Jake was quieter than usual, and when I asked him if he had fun at Grandma's, he nodded but wouldn't meet my eyes. Then he pulled a smartphone out of his pocket. A brand new iPhone, still in its box with a note attached, for Jake, so we can talk anytime. Love, Dad. My hands went numb. Derek had given our 5-year-old son a phone, a direct line of communication that completely bypassed the protection order. And he'd done it through his mother, using her supervised visit as cover. I called Margaret immediately. She told me not to panic, to document everything, and to bring the phone to court. This was exactly the kind of blatant violation we needed. But as I sat there that night, watching Jake sleep with his little hand curled under his chin, I felt something break inside me. Derek wasn't just violating a court order. He was weaponizing our children's love for him, turning them into tools of control and manipulation. The morning of the custody hearing, I woke up at 5 a.m. with my heart pounding. I'd barely slept, running through everything in my mind. The notes, the phone, the text messages, Emma's nightmares, Jake's confusion. Margaret had prepared me as best she could, but she'd also warned me that family court could be unpredictable. Judges had wide discretion, and Derek's lawyer was expensive and experienced. I dropped the kids off at Rachel's apartment before heading to the courthouse. Emma hugged me extra tight, and Jake asked when he could see Daddy again. The innocence in his voice nearly broke me. They didn't understand that their father was hurting them, that his love came with conditions and manipulation. The courtroom in the Philadelphia Family Court building was smaller than I expected, with fluorescent lights that hummed too loudly and wooden benches that creaked under the weight of broken families. Derek sat on the opposite side with his lawyer, Marcus Stone, a silver-haired man in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Derek looked calm, confident even, like this was just another business meeting. Margaret squeezed my hand as we sat down. She'd organized everything into neat manila folders. Printed text messages, photos of the handwritten notes, the supervisor reports from the family center, even a sworn statement from Mrs. Patterson about Emma's emotional state at school. The evidence was damning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek would somehow talk his way out of this. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered, and everyone stood. She was a black woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses perched on her nose and an expression that gave nothing away. She'd been on the family court bench for over 15 years, according to Margaret, and had a reputation for being thorough and fair, but also no nonsense. The hearing began with Derek's lawyer speaking first. He painted a picture of a devoted father being kept from his children by a vindictive ex-wife. He claimed I was using the protection order as a weapon, that I'd exaggerated the domestic violence, that Derek had only been trying to co-parent effectively when he sent those messages through the children. I sat there, my fingernails digging into my palms, listening to this man twist the truth into something unrecognizable. He made Derek sound like the victim, like I was the one causing harm. Then it was our turn. Margaret stood and calmly began presenting the evidence. She showed the judge every note, every message, every violation. She explained how Derek had deliberately used the children as messengers, knowing full well it violated the protection order. She presented the iPhone, still in its box, as exhibit number 12. If you're watching this and you've ever felt powerless in a courtroom, if you've ever wondered whether justice really exists, stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. Judge Hendricks leaned forward, removing her glasses slowly. She looked directly at Derek, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Can you explain to me, Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice measured but cold, "why you thought it was appropriate to communicate with your ex-wife through your 8-year-old daughter when you had a valid protection order against you?" Derek shifted in his seat. His lawyer started to speak, but the judge raised her hand, silencing him. "I asked Mr. Mitchell, not you, counselor." Derek cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I was just trying to handle practical matters. Insurance, school forms, things that affect the children. I wasn't trying to harass anyone." The judge picked up one of the notes Margaret had submitted. She read it aloud. "Tell your mother to stop being difficult and just talk to me like an adult." She set it down and stared at Derek. "Does that sound like a practical matter regarding insurance to you, Mr. Mitchell?" The courtroom was silent except for the hum of those fluorescent lights. Derek's face had gone red. I was frustrated, Your Honor. Co-parenting has been extremely difficult. Because your ex-wife obtained a protection order after you physically assaulted her? Derek's jaw tightened. He glanced at his lawyer, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "That's her version of events, Your Honor." Judge Hendricks flipped through the file in front of her. Medical records documenting a cracked rib. Photographs. A statement from your daughter describing what she witnessed. She looked up. "This seems fairly well documented, Mr. Mitchell." Then she held up the photo of the iPhone. "And this? You gave a 5-year-old child a smartphone to circumvent the court's protection order?" "I wanted to be able to talk to my son," Derek said, and there was an edge of desperation in his voice now. "Is that a crime? When it violates a court order?" "Yes, Mr. Mitchell. It is." Judge Hendricks closed the folder and folded her hands. She looked at Derek with an expression I'd never forget, something between disappointment and disgust. "You've used your children as tools to continue controlling and harassing their mother. You've turned them into messengers, knowing they'd carry the emotional weight of your manipulation. You've violated a protection order not once, but repeatedly, deliberately, and with clear intent." She paused, and in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. A sense that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally seeing the truth. "Your Honor," Derek's lawyer interjected, "my client loves his children and—" Judge Hendricks cut him off with a look. "I'm sure he does, counselor. But love doesn't give you the right to manipulate, control, or violate court orders." She opened another folder. "Let's discuss what happens next." Judge Hendricks adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Derek with an expression that made him visibly shrink in his seat. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm finding you in contempt of court for willful and repeated violations of the Protection from Abuse order." She let that sink in for a moment. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "Furthermore, based on the evidence presented today, I am modifying the custody arrangement effective immediately." Derek's face went pale. "Your Honor, please." She held up her hand. "Your supervised visitation will continue, but it will now take place exclusively at the family center with a court-appointed supervisor. No more visits at grandmother's house, no more opportunities for you to circumvent the rules. Additionally, you are prohibited from giving the children any communication devices, sending messages through them, or using them as intermediaries in any capacity whatsoever." Margaret squeezed my hand under the table, but I couldn't breathe. I was afraid to hope, afraid this wasn't real. The judge continued, You will attend a mandatory co-parenting course focused on high-conflict situations, and you will complete an anger management program before any consideration is given to expanding your visitation. She flipped to another page. I'm also ordering a psychological evaluation for you and the children to assess the emotional impact of your behavior. Derek's lawyer stood. Your Honor, with all due respect, my client. With all due respect, counselor, your client has demonstrated a clear pattern of manipulation and control. He's used his own children as pawns in a game of power. That's not co-parenting. That's abuse. She looked back at Derek. And it stops today. I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. These weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were relief, validation, justice. Judge Hendricks turned to me, and her expression softened just slightly. Ms. Mitchell, I want to commend you for documenting everything so thoroughly. Too many parents don't keep records, and it makes my job infinitely harder. You protected your children by protecting yourself, and that takes courage. I nodded, unable to speak. Margaret whispered that I could breathe now. The judge made a few more notes, then looked up one final time. This hearing is adjourned. Mr. Mitchell, you'll receive the formal order within 72 hours. I suggest you read it carefully and follow it to the letter, because if you appear before me again for violating it, the consequences will be far more severe. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Derek said quietly, his earlier confidence completely shattered. As we left the courtroom, I saw Derek standing in the hallway with his lawyer, his hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who'd finally been forced to face the truth about himself. Rachel was waiting outside with the kids. When Emma saw me, she ran into my arms. Is everything okay, Mommy? I held her tight and kissed the top of her head. Everything's going to be okay now, sweetheart. Promise. 18 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new townhouse in Ardmore, watching through the window as Emma and Jake played in the backyard. Emma was pushing Jake on the tire swing we'd installed last spring, and their laughter floated through the open window like music. The townhouse wasn't fancy. It had 3 bedrooms, a small yard, and a mortgage that sometimes kept me up at night. But it was ours, truly ours, and every corner of it felt like freedom. Emma had stopped having nightmares about 6 months after the custody hearing. Her teacher sent home a note last month saying she'd made honor roll and seemed like a completely different child, confident and happy. Jake had started kindergarten and made friends easily. His natural sweetness no longer weighed down by the tension he'd carried for so long. Derek still had his supervised visits every other Saturday. The court-appointed psychologist's evaluation had been eye-opening. It confirmed what I'd always known but couldn't quite articulate. Derek's need for control stemmed from deep insecurity, and his manipulation of the children was a pattern he'd likely continue without serious intervention. He'd completed the anger management course and the co-parenting class, but Judge Hendricks had been clear that any expansion of custody would be gradual and contingent on continued good behavior. The kids came home from visits now without hidden notes, without anxiety, without the weight of being messengers. They talked about playing board games with their dad at the center, about the supervisor Miss Jennifer who always brought coloring books. It wasn't the relationship Derek had wanted, but it was healthy, and that's what mattered. I'd started working again, part-time at first, then full-time as an administrative coordinator at a nonprofit in West Philadelphia. The money wasn't great, but my coworkers were kind, and my boss understood when I needed to leave early for school pickups or therapy appointments. Rachel came over most Sundays for dinner. She'd helped me paint Emma's room lavender and taught Jake how to ride his bike without training wheels. She was the kind of sister everyone deserves, the kind who shows up without being asked. As I watched my kids play, I thought about that morning in the courtroom, how terrified I'd been, how powerless I'd felt for so long. I thought about Judge Hendricks and the way she'd seen through Derek's manipulation, how she'd protected my children when I couldn't do it alone. The protection order was still in place. It would be for another year at least. And honestly, I didn't mind. The distance felt safe. Emma looked up and waved at me through the window, her smile bright and genuine. I waved back, and in that moment, I knew we'd made it. We'd survived, and more than that, we were healing. If you stayed with me through this whole story, Thank you from the bottom of my heart. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling me what topics you'd like to see next, because your stories matter, your voice matters, and you're not alone. Never forget that.